The last quadrilateral we have to cover is a kite. And a kite is also not a subshape of a parallelogram, and it's not a subshape of a trapezoid. So a kite is in its own branch. And the thing that differentiates a kite is that you don't have any parallel sides. So you have no parallel sides, but you do have two sets of congruent consecutive sides, consecutive or adjacent, since they kind of mean the same thing for sides. Okay, so what that's going to look like is those will be congruent and these will be congruent, and that's what makes a kite a kite. There's some other properties in here. What you have for a kite is you can't have any opposite sides that are congruent, because that would make it something else. If the opposite sides are congruent, that's going to make it a parallelogram. So you have to have just adjacent sides that are congruent, two sets of them. The other thing that you'll find is you're going to have one set of opposite angles that are congruent. And that set is going to be the set that's in between the non-congruent sides. So this angle would be congruent to this one. So they're between non-congruent sides. The other property is that the diagonals are going to be perpendicular. Okay, so if I put my diagonals in here, okay, they're going to make right angles with each other. So those are the properties of kites. Okay, so I guess I kind of put that stuff up here. Well, we can write it again down here. Diagonals, perpendicular, and this diagonals being perpendicular, that comes from the perpendicular bisector theorem, because if you notice, this point here is equidistant from these two endpoints, so it's on the perpendicular bisector of this segment. This point up here is equidistant from these endpoints also, so it's on the perpendicular bisector of this segment as well. So not only are they right angles, but this diagonal is going to bisect this one. Okay, our perpendicular and one bisects the other. Okay, and the one that it is the one that runs from the non-congruent angles. Opposite angles, so again I said the set between non-congruent sides are congruent. Okay, so here's some examples we could do. Find the missing measurements. So we're going to have this kite here. I know that these angles are going to be congruent. So 130 plus 50 plus whatever these are. So plus 2x's has to equal 360 degrees. Well, this is 180. So if I subtract that, I got 2x equals 180, which would make these 90-degree angles. If we're looking at diagonal lengths here, we can find these missing sides since we know the diagonals are perpendicular. We can use the Pythagorean theorem because I've got this right triangle here. Okay, and I know that A and B, the legs, the sides that make the right angle together. So A squared plus B squared equals, this would be my C squared. So we get 25 plus 144, which is 169, equals C squared. You square root, you get 13. So this is 13, which means this will also be 13. I can do the Pythagorean theorem again down here to find this, because now this will be my hypotenuse, or C. So 12 squared plus 16 squared equals C squared. 144 plus, let's see, 16 squared is 256 equals C squared. If I add these together, I'm going to get 400. If I square root that, I'm going to get 20. So this is 20. This is 20. I know that this line here is a perpendicular bisector of the other diagonal, so if this is 12, this is also 12. Okay, and then I've got all my missing sides. Right, and that's all of the special quadrilaterals that there are. Anything that's not one of these shapes. So let's fill in our front with the kite here. Let's make it the same color. Okay. Same thing that's not one of these is just a quadrilateral. That's all you can call it. And if you notice, I've got a line going from kite down to rhombus. Because if we find that we've got adjacent sides that are congruent, but then we later find out that we have all the sides that are congruent, okay, that's going to lead us down to rhombus. So 4 congruent sides. Okay, because the thing that takes us from quadrilateral to kite is 2 sets of adjacent sides are congruent. Okay, and if we find out later that all 4 sides are congruent, that takes us down to rhombus. That doesn't mean that all rhombuses are kites, although they do share a lot of the same properties, because rhombus has perpendicular diagonals also. And it has both sets of opposite angles congruent. So, I mean, it kind of works that way, but I don't really want to think of a rhombus as a kite. It's more of a parallelogram, and it doesn't have to be a kite in order to be a rhombus. So, although they do share the same properties. All right, so we've got just one more section after this where we'll start identifying quadrilaterals from all these, and then there's another section after that which is area, which isn't quite in line with the rest, but it does deal with the same shapes.